Okay, in my final PowerPoint on biological theories, I'm going to look specifically at brain injuries and disorders and biochemical explanations for criminality. We'll then evaluate those and then assess how they inform policy development. So let's just refresh our minds about biological theories. They're basically stating that criminals are in some way biologically different from non-criminals, and it's this difference that causes them to commit crime. So, as I said, today we're going to look at brain injuries and disorders and biochemical explanations for criminality. And basically what this group of things is doing, they're claiming that certain diseases, injuries, malfunctions of the brain, or biochemical substances and processes are linked to criminality. So let's start by looking at brain injuries and disorders. And I'm going to introduce you to this man here, who is Phineas Gage. Now, there are some rare cases of brain injuries being identified as the cause of criminality. And this is the case of railway worker Phineas Gage, whose personality changed after a major brain injury. Now, I've included a link in this PowerPoint to a very good little 5-minute clip on Phineas Gage, which you can watch at your leisure. It goes into a bit more detail than I'm going to do in this PowerPoint. But basically, Gage was an American railroad construction foreman who survived an accident in which a large iron rod was driven completely through his head, destroying much of his left frontal lobe. And here he is posing with the iron rod, and it basically went straight through the back of his head, up through his eye and through his frontal lobe here. And later on I'll show you a picture of the skull from his autopsy. Now, he survived the accident, but the injury actually affected his personality and behaviour. He survived for another 12 years, but his friends and indeed his doctor said that what they witnessed was a person who was no longer the Phineas Gage that they knew. He was eventually sacked from his job because he kept uttering profanities, swearing all the time, constantly. So it had changed the way he behaved, this brain injury. But as I said, you can look at the YouTube clip and that'll give you some more information. And here is the picture or the diagram of where the iron rod went in Gage's skull. Amazingly, he was alive and he was talking 1 minute after this had happened and was back at work after 10 weeks. So it looks like a horrendous injury, but nevertheless he survived for 12 years afterwards. So that's Gage, and certainly studies have shown that prisoners are more likely than non-prisoners to have suffered brain injuries. And if brain injuries are linked to changes in behaviour, then that gives us the link perhaps to criminality and criminal behaviour. And the evidence is supported by the fact that if you have damage to the frontal lobe of the brain, this part here, it can cause aggressive and violent behaviour. And many people think this is linked to physical abuse as a child. If a baby is shaken, what happens is the brain inside the skull bangs against the side of the skull. So the frontal cortex of the brain, the frontal lobe, will be constantly banged as the baby is being shaken. And that will cause brain damage and could lead to aggression and violent behaviour. So here's an interesting case study. You can use this guy here, Charles Whitman, known as the Texas Tower Sniper. In 1966, he killed his wife and mother, stabbed them to death, then went up and climbed the tower of the University of Texas with a rifle and started just randomly shooting at people for 96 minutes. He killed 14, injured 31 before eventually being gunned down by the police. And when they did his autopsy, doctors found that he had a massive tumour on his brain. Now, obviously, because he'd been killed, there's no way of ascertaining whether that tumour actually caused Whitman to act the way he did, but certainly the autopsy report concluded that it was a distinct possibility. And there have been other case studies where people with brain tumours affecting the frontal lobe have suddenly experienced complete changes in personality and become very violent and impulsive. So Charles Whitman, a possible case study for you there. So, a team at Oxford University have tried to shed some light on the subject, whether brain injuries do adversely affect criminality. And this has led to a 35-year population study in Sweden led by Sina Faisal, a psychiatrist. And the results show overall in Swedes that the average Swede had a 2.5% chance of becoming a violent offender. But if they had a head injury on their records, that rose to 9%. Now, what's interesting with this study, they also made allowances for the fact that brain injuries could be a result of upbringing. So the researchers also looked at the siblings of those with brain damage. They had a 4.5% chance of becoming offenders too, so higher than the 2.5%. So what does all this mean? Well, in other words, what the Oxford research shows is that people have nearly double the chance of becoming violent offenders if they have something in their upbringing, whether it's genetics or the environment predisposes them towards it. So these may cause criminality, but if you add a head injury on top of that, then the risk of criminality is doubled again. So there's clear evidence that head injuries definitely are a contributory cause towards criminality in some way. And that then moves us on to brain diseases, because some diseases of the brain have been linked to criminality or antisocial behaviour. In the 1920s, epidemics of encephalitis lethargica among children were linked to destructive behaviour, impulsive behaviour, arson and abnormal behaviour in general. So that's a brain disease that was linked to criminal behaviour. Other brain diseases, including senile dementia, Huntington's disease, and as previously mentioned, brain tumours, have also been linked to various forms of deviant or antisocial behaviour. And if you are unfortunate enough to have a relative who suffers from senile dementia or Alzheimer's, you might appreciate how a brain disease will change the personality of someone, changing them to someone who previously they were not. So it would also be true that some studies that show abnormal electroencephalograph, now that's I will use EEG here, and please use EEG, not ECG, which you may have done in your biology GCSE. ECG is an electrocardiograph that measures heart rate, and EEG measures brain patterns. And they have shown by measuring, clearly insane murderers and psychopaths, that they have abnormal EEG readings. So their brain waves are abnormal. So that's insane murderers and psychopaths. So something in the brain is causing them to do what they do. And it would also be true that biochemical substances and processes have been suggested as a possible cause of criminal behaviour, because they affect the brain's chemistry and mental processes. Now, we've already looked at Jacob's XYY, and how males produce testosterone, a sex hormone. So certainly sex hormone testosterone has been linked to criminality, but not only testosterone, blood sugar levels, substance abuse as well. So for instance, if we talk about the sex hormone, males of most species are more aggressive than females. The male sex hormone testosterone has been linked to crimes such as murder and rape. And you only have to look at this bar chart here to see the difference in US crime statistics of assaults, aggravated assaults and murders between males and females. And the difference is startling. So the link there may be to that Y chromosome, to testosterone. And certainly studies by people such as Ellis and Kuntz point out that testosterone levels peak with puberty, from puberty to the early 20s, and this age correlates with the highest crime rate in males. So I've got later on this PowerPoint, I've got a little diagram which looks at testosterone rates in men, and it peaks around about 16 to 20 and then gradually falls away again all the way through to the 50s, and that has a direct correlation with the age of people in prison, where the men in prison more in that higher testosterone bracket than the lower testosterone bracket. So there is a correlation there. So here's your age of prison. So if you think about that, 15 to 19, going all the way down as we get older and older, and I'll show you later on in this PowerPoint exactly the same sort of peak of testosterone levels, falling almost identically with those ages. So grist to the mill, something for you to think about. And we could also look at biochemical explanations for criminality, still staying with the sex hormones, but this time for women. Premenstrual tension, postnatal depression, lactation, breastfeeding have all been accepted in courts as partial defences for women charged with crimes ranging from shoplifting to infanticide. PMT has been used as mitigating circumstances for shoplifting, and as has postnatal depression for infanticide, on the grounds that the hormones involved have affected the defendant's judgment, mood or self-control. So I've given you a link to this case here, where this lady here, Camilla Bogdan, was prosecuted for manslaughter and not murder on the grounds that she, even though she committed infanticide, killed her baby, but the CPS accepted the fact that she was suffering from postnatal depression and therefore lowered the charge to manslaughter and not murder. And again, if you can't read this, I've given the full link to that case for you to look at on this page. If we look at blood sugar levels, hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, has been linked to aggressive reactions. Studies show a link between low blood sugar and alcohol abuse. Drinking large quantities of alcohol can induce hypoglycemia and increase aggression. So alcohol consumption, again, is closely linked to crimes of violence. And here you can start to see links to alcohol in this chart. So the proportion of selected violence against the person offences recorded by the police which were alcohol related. So assault with injury on a constable, assault with intent to cause serious harm, you look at 25-35% influenced by alcohol. So a lot there. And Schoenthaler claims that if you lower the daily sucrose intakes of young offenders, you can reduce the level of their antisocial behaviour. So just keeping them off the sugary sweets, etc. Serotonin levels have been linked to criminality. Some studies show that low levels of serotonin are linked to higher aggression. Serotonin regulates signals between the neurons and is said to control someone's mood. Serbo and Rain conducted a meta-analysis on 25 studies into antisocial adults and children and found low levels of serotonin in all of them. So there's some evidence to suggest that's the case. If we are looking at substance abuse, Sanders calculated that alcohol plays a significant role in about 1,000 arrests a day. In the USA, Flanzer estimated that 80% of family violence cases involve alcohol. Cocaine and crack are also linked with violence, though ironically, cannabis, heroin and MDMA are linked to a reduction in aggression, strangely enough. I'm not advocating that one should take those. Certainly people who take large amounts of steroids can become extremely violent, known as roid rage. Steroids are often linked to muscle growth and again increased testosterone levels, which as we know has a direct link to violence, allegedly. And other substances as well. It amazes me that anything that colour could possibly be healthy. So other substances we ingest that have been linked with antisocial or criminal behaviour, such as food additives, diet, allergens, vitamin deficiencies, lead pollutions. They affect various biochemical processes in the body, and this can in turn affect behaviour. So for example, both lead and synthetic food colouring, particularly the food colouring tartrazine, which colours foods yellow, have been linked with hyperactivity. Vitamin B deficiency has been linked to erratic and aggressive behaviour. So all these lack of chemicals, lack of vitamins have been shown to correlate possibly with criminality. So let's evaluate this. Let's look at the strengths of the brain injuries and disorder argument to start off. Well, it's very clear that in a few extreme cases, brain injury or disease has led to major changes in an individual's personality behaviour, including criminality. You only have to look at the case of Phineas Gage to see that. There's certainly some correlation between abnormal EEG readings and psychopathic criminality, so there's a strength there. And there's certainly a correlation that prisoners are more likely than non-prisoners to have a brain injury. But having said that, there are limitations. Crimes caused by brain injury are very rare, and actually the sufferer's original personality is more important in whether they engage in crime. It's also not clear that abnormal brain activity causes psychopathic criminality. Some psychopaths have normal EEG patterns, and some normal people have abnormal EEG patterns, so the link isn't clear. And one could argue that the prisoner's higher likelihood of brain injury could actually be the result of their criminality, e.g. getting into fights, rather than the cause of it. So because they're a criminal, they are more susceptible to brain injuries. It's the other way round, for want of a better word. So let's look at biochemical explanations. And again, I said I'd have that chart of male testosterone, and there you go, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, as it goes down, the production by age, linking to that chart of men in prison as well. So the strengths of the biochemical explanations, well, blood sugar levels, sex hormones, substance abuse are all known to affect mood, judgment and aggression. Testosterone levels and male offending peak around the same age, which does suggest that hormones affect criminal behaviour. Alcohol definitely produces disinhibition, reduces self-control. I'm sure many people watching this PowerPoint will have done something they regret when they had a little bit too much to drink. I know I have. And leading to criminal behaviour, particularly violence. Not so much that case in my case. Crack cocaine has been strongly linked to violent crime as well. And biochemical factors are recognised by the courts. For instance, that law of infanticide states that if a mother kills her baby as a result of postnatal depression or breastfeeding, she has a partial defence to murder. Premenstrual tension, as I've mentioned before, has been accepted as a defence in shoplifting cases. So there are judicial precedents there for this. But there are limitations. Biochemical processes may predispose some people to offend, but that doesn't mean the cause is there. It could mean an environmental trigger is needed to actually cause actual offending. So it may not be the nature, it is actually the nurture that's the cause. Scarmella and Brown found that testosterone levels don't greatly affect aggression levels in most men. So there's an interesting study. Schalling found that high testosterone levels in young males led to verbal aggression, but not physical violence. So maybe the correlation isn't there after all. And infanticide may be due to isolation and the responsibility for caring for a newborn child rather than hormones, it could be argued. But as we come to the end of this section on biological theories, there are some general criticisms that one can make of biological theories as a whole. So for instance, environmental factors. All biological theories ignore environmental factors for criminology. A person's biology may give them potentially criminal characteristics, but many argue they need an environmental trigger to engage in a criminal act. So it's not all nature, it's a combination of nature and nurture. And I think that's an argument I would use all the time when I'm evaluating biological theories. And the other thing you can use in general for biological theories is sample bias. Researchers often use studies of convicted criminals. But have a think about this. Is that representative of all criminals? Actually, it's not. It's only representative of the criminals that have been caught. The criminals who got away are not represented in the sample. So you haven't actually got a sound basis for generalising about all criminals. Actually, what you've got is the ones who were caught. Maybe the smarter ones, the more ingenious ones who got away, do not have these sort of features that are being talked about in these studies. So there's sample bias. So have a think about how you can weave sample bias into some of these arguments you can make when evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of biological theories. And there's also gender bias as well, because most of the theories and most of the research we've looked at focus on males. It doesn't actually explain female criminality very well at all. And going back to the very first few ACs that we did on this course, AC 1.2 I think, if crime is a social construct, if what counts as crime varies between cultures and over time, it makes no sense to look for universal explanations for it, because that's what a biological theory is doing. If you're saying that crime is relative, depends on culture, time, place, etc., then you can't try and pigeonhole crime, which is what biological theories are trying to do, because crime is a social construct. It's not anything that's real as such. So have a think about how you could use that as an argument.